There's little doubt that Queen Elizabeth is one of the most loved figures in the UK, if not the world. She has been in the public eye all her life and has made history as the longest reigning monarch ever. In addition to this notable achievement, she is the most traveled world leader. At 94, she continues to serve her royal engagements, with ties to more than 600 organizations, including charities, public services, and professional groups. But being such a well-traveled, familiar, and public figure has its downsides too. She has been in danger on more than one occasion from people with sinister motives. Luckily, in her life, she has often proved herself to be famously cool-headed and resourceful. As one of the world's most visible and symbolic figures, the Queen has come under some seriously close calls, as she's literally faced potential life or death threats during her 7 decades of rule. While some attempts played out in front of the public, others took decades to come to light to protect the royal family. In this video, we will show you 3 attempts at the Queen's life. Number 1. Australia, 1970. An official royal tour is a much-anticipated event, and in 1970, Queen Elizabeth and her husband, the late Prince Philip, were on a tour of Australia. It was on this trip, according to former Detective Superintendent Cliff McCarty, that an attempt was made on the Queen's life. For one stretch of their travels, the monarch and her husband were to go by rail from Sydney to Orange in New South Wales on April 29. Would-be assassins had placed a log on the train tracks to derail the locomotive as it neared Lithgow. Another train had scouted the tracks an hour before the Queen's train came through, finding nothing. So the log's subsequent appearance fueled suspicions there was an assassination plot. Fortunately for the royal couple, Albert Rowley was at the wheel and spotted the object, pulling the brakes just in the nick of time. Since the tracks had been checked just an hour prior to the incident, it's thought that the log was placed there purposefully and timed to the passing of the royal train. Had the train been going full speed, it could have derailed and flown into the embankment, experts told. The news didn't become public until 2009, when a retired detective spoke out about the incident, breaking the decades of silence agreed upon by the cops and press. While the royals and the palace reportedly were unaware of the incident, the Telegraph said that Rowley was given an Imperial Service Medal back in 1974 in recognition of the meritorious service which you have rendered, as the certificate reads. How it happened. Former Detective Superintendent Cliff McCarty said, the unsophisticated plan consisted of placing a large wooden log across railway tracks near Lithgow in the Blue Mountains, in a bid to derail the royal train. A newspaper in regional New South Wales, the Lithgow Mercury, kept a lid on the story for the past 40 years because of a police request not to print it. Details of the alleged conspiracy were kept under wraps to spare the Australian government any embarrassment, but now the secret is out. News of the plot has finally emerged because Mr. McCarty, who was the investigating officer at the time, wants to crack the unsolved mystery, saying, "It was one of the big regrets of my police service." Mr. McCarty, 81, said a catastrophe was only narrowly averted, with the train striking the log, but remaining on the tracks. Mr. McCarty told he had no idea who was behind the plot and only learned of it the morning after it occurred, when he was asked to retrieve the log. He said the NSW government knew of the incident and that federal police and the Queen's security had been on board the royal train. While the retired officer said there was little record of the event, Lithgow police station's running sheets from the time would have detailed their inquiries. The Queen and her husband are said to be unaware to this day that anything untoward happened. The Lithgow plot, as it was known, occurred midway through the couple's state visit as they traveled from Sydney across the Blue Mountains on the Commissioner's train. On April 29, 1970, the train entered a winding cutting near Lithgow and then struck a large log that had been wedged across the rails. The log became stuck under the front wheels, and the train slid for almost 200 meters before coming to a halt at a level crossing, still on the tracks and largely unscathed. Police suspected It was an act of sabotage designed to kill or injure the Queen, who had just celebrated her 44th birthday, and her husband. If the train had derailed, it would have crashed into an embankment, said Mr. McCarty, who was in charge of the Lithgow police force for 11 years. Marks at the scene suggested the log had been rolled onto the tracks and maneuvered into position. Australian IRA sympathizers were among those suspected of being behind the plot. Police investigations included an inquiry into possible links with an earlier incident when detonators were placed in the path of the royal train as it approached Blackheath, the Lithgow Mercury reported. Mr. McCarty said details of the incident were covered up by authorities who played gag on the release of any information to the media. But the secrecy also hampered the police investigation. We never came up with any decent suspects because if we interview people, we seem to be talking in riddles. Mr. McCarty said, "We couldn't disclose what our inquiries were about. Perhaps now that the story has gone public, someone might come forward." Number 2. Trooping the Colour, 1981. Trooping the Colour is an annual ceremonial event held in London, and on June 13, 1981, crowds gathered along the Mall to watch the Queen attending the ceremony on horseback. In the crowd was a 17-year-old named Marcus Sargent. As the Queen rode by, he fired 6 blanks from a starting pistol. According to reports, the Queen's horse, Burmese, was startled, but the sovereign managed to calm him down and rode on. Sargent was arrested and brought to trial. He admitted that he wanted to be famous like Mark Chapman, the killer of John Lennon, and had been inspired by the assassination of John F. Kennedy and John Lennon the year before. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison under the Treason Act, given that he had willfully discharged at or near Her Majesty the Queen a gun with the intent to alarm or distress Her Majesty. The extraordinary events of 1981, Trooping the Colour, began with the Queen leading the ceremonial procession along the Mall on horseback. In a flash, Sargent pointed a pistol directly at her, firing 6 blank cartridges before being wrestled to the ground by police. The Queen remained preternaturally calm, offering her 19-year-old horse Burmese a reassuring pat before riding on, as cool as a cucumber, as if nothing had happened. Her former guard Alec Galloway recalled at the time. BBC reports at the time said, "She looked shaken by the episode, but soon recovered her composure." The incident occurred just after 11 a.m., as the Queen, dressed in a scarlet military tunic and a black riding skirt, rode from Buckingham Palace past huge crowds along the tree-lined Mall on her way to the ceremony. Although the Queen, 55 years old, was never apparently in serious danger, the incident underscored the difficulty of protecting someone whose job consists largely of appearing at public functions. As millions watched on television, the youth, identified by the police as Marcus Simon Sargent, 17, simply stepped from the crowd and fired directly at the Queen, as many as 6 times, before being wrestled to the ground by policemen and onlookers. Just behind the Queen, who was at the head of the procession, were Prince Philip, her husband, and Prince Charles, her son and heir to the throne. Afterward, the ceremony proceeded uneventfully. Mr. Sargent, from the coastal town of Folkestone, was charged under the Treason Act of 1842. He was scheduled to appear in court and faces a maximum sentence of 7 years. Charged under the 1848 Treason Act, Sargent was jailed for 5 years. Described as a shy loner obsessed with the murders of President John F. Kennedy and John Lennon, the teen had written in his diary, "I am going to stun and mystify the whole world with nothing more than a gun. I will become the most famous teenager in the world." It was a testament to her skills as a horsewoman and her unflappable character, because she did not panic even in the face of what was seemingly an assassination attempt. You'll see that the professional soldiers riding in the procession panicked much more than the Queen did. She was the first to regain control of her horse. Police and plainclothes bodyguards rushed to the scene, and people in the crowd watching the ceremony screamed. But the Queen retained her composure. Not only did she get her horse under control and not panic, But it's also important to remember that the Queen was 55 years old at the time, whereas the soldiers around her were almost certainly young enough to be her sons. Reflecting on the incident, during a 2016 BBC documentary, Prince Charles said, "She's a marvelous rider. She has a marvelous way with horses. She is made of strong stuff, you know." The Queen continued to lead the parade with her beloved Burmese until the horse died in 1986. The Queen started riding when she was just 4 years old. Her grandfather gave her her first pony and was taught to ride side saddle as well as conventionally. Royal historian Hugo Vickers claimed the monarch would have been worried that her son and heir Prince Charles or her husband Prince Philip had been shot. Recalling the day, he said, "She must have wondered for a moment if her husband or son or one of her cousins had been shot behind her." Charles and Philip were riding behind the Queen, who was on her horse Burmese, during the parade on June 13, 1981. The incident raised new fears about security for the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer on July 29, a month after the shooting. Some witnesses said that Mr. Sargent had a Lady Diana and Prince Charles wedding button on his jacket. As for Sargent, he was released in October 1984 at the age of 20 and was given a new identity. He reportedly wrote to the Queen from prison to apologize, but he never received a reply. Number 3. New Zealand, 1981. The Queen again faced an assassination attempt during a visit to New Zealand in 1981, while visiting a museum in the city of Dunedin. 4 months later, on October 14, 1981, the Queen was visiting New Zealand with Prince Philip when another 17-year-old had the same idea. Hiding in an empty toilet stall on the 5th floor of a building in Dunedin, John Lewis took aim with a rifle just as the royals got out of a Rolls-Royce. Fortunately for the Queen, Lewis missed. As it turns out, his weapon couldn't have shot so far, and he wasn't exactly in the best physical location to do so. It may be the closest anyone has ever come to assassinating Queen Elizabeth II. In 1981, Christopher John Lewis, a disturbed New Zealand teenager, aimed his .22 rifle at the British monarch during her tour of the country, lining up her jade outfit in his scope. The bullet missed as the government scrambled to conceal how close the self-styled terrorist had come to killing the head of state. 2 years after shooting at the Queen, the teenager, planning to murder Prince Charles, attempted to escape from a psychiatric ward. In 1995, New Zealand police sent him on a taxpayer-funded holiday during the Queen's November tour, believing him to be safer snoozing on a beach than anywhere within firing distance of the monarch. By the age of 17, Lewis had a history of armed robbery, arson, and animal torture. He idolized the Australian bandit Ned Kelly and American serial killer Charles Manson. On Wednesday, 14 October 1981, Lewis pulled on gloves and loaded his rifle inside a deserted toilet cubicle in New Zealand's oldest city, Dunedin, aiming his scope at the Queen's motorcade 5 stories below. Later, police found clippings on the royal family in Lewis's squalid flat, as well as a detailed map of the Queen's route that day, with the words Operation Asqueb written on the paper. The Queen had just stepped out of a Rolls-Royce to greet 3,500 well-wishers when a distinctive crack rang out across the grassy reserve. According to former Dunedin Police Det SGT Tom Lewis, no relation to the shooter, police immediately attempted to disguise the seriousness of the threat, telling the British press the noise was a council sign falling over. Later, under further questioning from reporters, they said someone had been letting off firecrackers nearby. According to Tom Lewis, the then Prime Minister Robert Muldoon feared if word got out about how close the teenager had come to killing the Queen, the royals would never again visit New Zealand. Police interviewed the teenager 8 times, during which he claimed he had been instructed to kill the Queen by an Englishman known to him as the Snowman, of whom Lewis was frightened. The Snowman allegedly told Lewis about the pro-Nazi, right-wing National Front in England, and said Louise could be part of similar groups that were popping up in New Zealand. Louise later claimed to have been visited by high-ranking officials from the government in Wellington during his 13-day interrogation and was told never to discuss the incident. If I was ever to mention the events surrounding my interviews or the organization, or that I was in the building, or that I was shooting from it, that they would make sure I suffered a fate worse than death. Louise wrote in a draft autobiography found beside his body after he killed himself. It was published posthumously. Though some investigators believed he had wanted to kill the royal couple, he was charged only with possessing and firing a weapon in public and sentenced to 3 years in jail. Louise did indeed originally intend to assassinate the Queen, a released memo said. However, did not have a suitable vantage point from which to fire, nor a sufficiently high-powered rifle for the range from the target. Further evidence of Louise's obsession with the royal family emerged in 1983 when he attempted to overpower a guard at a psychiatric hospital where he was being detained to assassinate Prince Charles, who visited the country in April with the Princess of Wales and their young son William. Louise killed himself in prison at the age of 33, while awaiting trial for the murder of a young mother and the kidnapping of her child. Shortly before his death, Louise told his partner about his infamous attempt to assassinate the Queen of England. "Damn," he told her, "damn, I missed." There's no doubt that a degree of risk comes with being out in the public eye, the way Her Majesty has been for the greater part of a century. Despite the team she has around her, often the incidents were simply stopped by her own calm and collective nature. After all, she's always had her priorities in check, as proven by what she said on her 21st birthday. In 1947, "My whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong." Thank you for watching this video. We hope that you like it, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already done that. We also appreciate your feedback, so don't shy away from sharing your thoughts and opinions in the comments section. We will be back with another amazing video, so make sure that you have clicked on the bell icon to get notified. Peace out.